What if I told you that the most prolific serial killer in American history walked among us for decades, completely unnoticed? His name wasn't Ted Bundy. It wasn't Jeffrey Dahmer. It was a man you've probably never heard of. A man who used a very specific and surprisingly simple method to avoid detection for over 35 years. How did he do it? And why? Did no one stop him? The answers are shocking. Today, True Evil Crime presents the real story of Samuel Little, a man who admitted to 93 murders, most of which the world had forgotten. Will show how simple and brutal his methods were, the system's failures that let him get away, and the 11th hour investigation that finally brought his horrifying career to a close. This is the story of a predator who found weaknesses in society, used them with shocking violence, and vanished, leaving behind a trail of silence and one of the nation's darkest secrets. The key to Samuel's success was simple: manual strangulation. He never used weapons, never left a mess. His victims often died in ways that seemed normal, so their deaths were blamed on something else. Imagine a woman's body, found bruised, yet with no obvious cause of death. How did medical examiners explain these deaths for so long, and what detail did they consistently overlook? Samuel, a former boxer, used his immense strength to knock out his victims with a powerful punch before strangling them. This method meant he didn't need any tools, and because there were no obvious injuries, medical examiners often recorded the deaths as something else. In the absence of a visible weapon wound, they would attribute the death to drug overdoses, accidents, or natural causes. This simple misclassification was the get-out-of-jail-free card he played 93 times. But his method was only part of the puzzle. His crimes spread across 19 states, from Florida to California. He moved constantly, slipping from state to state, always staying one step ahead. How was he able to travel so freely and commit murders in so many different jurisdictions without anyone noticing a pattern? How could someone with an extensive criminal record, a known history of violence against women, and a travel route that cut across the country evade the attention of countless law enforcement agencies? The answer lies in systemic failures. In the 70s, 80s, and even early 90s, there was no national database to link a drifter's criminal record in Ohio with an unsolved homicide in Florida. Samuel's constantly moving lifestyle took full advantage of this, feeding off the lack of communication between agencies. His record was a scattered patchwork of petty crimes, assaults, and arrests across the country, making it impossible for any single police department to see the whole picture. But there's a darker, more disturbing reason he got away with it for so long. Little deliberately hunted society's most vulnerable: sex workers, drug addicts, and women living in poverty. He specifically targeted African American women, who made up 75% of his confirmed victims. In his own words, "I never killed no senators or governors or fancy New York journalists. Nothing like that. I stayed in the ghettos." What did he understand about the criminal justice system that gave him the confidence to target these women and believe he would never be caught? He understood and exploited what's known as the less dead phenomenon. He knew that deaths involving marginalized communities often received less investigative resources and media attention. The lack of family members actively searching for them, combined with biases in law enforcement, meant their cases were more likely to be dismissed or closed prematurely. He calculated that their lives were valued less by the system, and his calculation was tragically correct. After decades of getting away with it, his luck finally ran out in 2012 when he was arrested for a routine parole violation. But even then, he wasn't a suspect in any murders. It was a single, dedicated Texas Ranger named James Holland, who saw something no one else did. Holland didn't use aggression or intimidation. His approach was completely different, and it led to the most shocking confessions in history. What unusual technique did Holland use to get Samuel, a man who had never confessed to anything, to admit to 93 murders? Holland built a rapport with Samuel. He would spend hours with him, not just interrogating him, but talking to him about his life, sharing meals, and treating him with a respect Samuel hadn't experienced. He tapped into Samuel's ego and his desire to be recognized. Holland also provided him with art supplies, a simple gesture that unlocked the final, crucial piece of evidence. Samuel began to draw. He drew portraits of his victims from memory, decades after the fact. These drawings weren't just morbid art. They were specific, detailed clues that would help solve dozens of cold cases. These portraits became a lifeline for investigators and families seeking answers. The FBI released them to the public, and they led to the identification of several victims. But what about the other women? What about the cases where there were no remains to identify, or the bodies were so decomposed that DNA was useless? What new technology is being used right now to identify the remaining victims and give them back their names? This is where the story of Samuel Little, the killer, ends, and the story of his victims, the forgotten, begins. Forensic genealogy. This powerful new technology, using DNA from crime scenes and comparing it with genetic databases, has finally started to crack the decades-old mysteries. Investigators used this method to identify Yvonne Pless, a 20-year-old woman Samuel murdered in 1977. For 46 years, she was known as Macon Jane Doe. But thanks to this new science, she is a daughter, a sister, a human being with a name and a story. The investigation continues, and more women are being identified even today, years after Samuel's death. We started with the question of how Samuel Little got away with so much for so long. He wasn't a criminal genius. He was simply a product of a system that didn't connect the dots, a society that didn't see certain lives as worth investigating. His crimes forced us to confront the hard truth that justice is not always equal, and that a killer can hide in plain sight if he preys on the forgotten. But in the end, it was a dedicated detective, a stack of haunting portraits, and the relentless march of science that finally brought a measure of justice to the women who were almost lost to history forever. The legacy of Samuel Little isn't just the sheer number of lives he took. It's the renewed commitment to ensuring that every life, no matter the circumstances, is worthy of being remembered.